the first thing Maren noticed was that the crib was gone. Not the tiny socks she had folded the evening before. Not the framed ultrasound picture still sitting on the living room shelf. Not the wedding photograph smiling back at her from the hallway. The crib was gone, leaving a pale rectangle on the nursery floor where it had stood only yesterday, as if someone had erased every promise her husband had ever made. 7 months pregnant, exhausted from another routine doctor's appointment, Maren stood frozen in the afternoon sunlight spilling through the nursery window while her heart pounded so violently she could barely breathe. Then her phone vibrated. She opened the message with trembling hands, expecting an apology or an explanation. Instead, she found only 8 devastating words: "I'm leaving. I can't be the husband you deserve." In that single moment, the future she had spent years dreaming about shattered into pieces before her eyes. If stories of hope, forgiveness, and second chances mean something to you, we hope you'll stay with us until the very end and share your thoughts about this journey. Maren Whitmore had always believed life rewarded patience. She had spent years working as an elementary school art teacher in the peaceful town of Ashford, where every afternoon children filled the sidewalks with laughter as parents gathered beneath rows of old maple trees. She loved simple routines, watercolor paintings, homemade bread cooling on the kitchen counter, and quiet weekends spent planting flowers around the little white house she shared with her husband, Declan. Their life had never been glamorous, but it had always felt steady, and to Maren, that mattered far more than expensive vacations or luxury cars. After 4 years of marriage and countless disappointing doctor visits, discovering she was pregnant felt like witnessing a miracle. Declan had cried before she did, lifting her into his arms and promising their child would grow up knowing kindness, honesty, and unconditional love. Every sunny afternoon after work they wandered through baby stores comparing tiny blankets, reading parenting books, and laughing over how unbelievably small newborn shoes looked. Declan insisted on building the nursery furniture himself, refusing to hire anyone because he wanted to tell their child someday that every screw had been tightened with love. The pregnancy seemed to bring them even closer. Declan attended every appointment he could, proudly carrying blurry ultrasound photographs in his wallet. Whenever the baby kicked, he placed his hand gently against Maren's stomach, smiling with the amazement of someone discovering happiness for the first time. Friends admired them, convinced they were one of those rare couples who would remain deeply in love forever. But while Maren dreamed about lullabies and bedtime stories, another story was unfolding behind closed doors. Declan owned a small architectural design company that had grown quickly during prosperous years. Several major contracts had allowed him to hire employees, rent office space, and believe success would continue indefinitely. Then, within a few months, everything changed. A nationwide slowdown halted construction projects. Clients delayed payments. 2 large investors withdrew unexpectedly, leaving his business responsible for debts far greater than its remaining income. Declan tried solving every problem alone, believing he simply needed more time. He borrowed money. He refinanced equipment. He sold personal belongings without mentioning it. Each decision seemed temporary until another setback appeared. The weight of failure settled on his shoulders like an invisible storm cloud that followed him everywhere. At first, Maren noticed only little changes. Declan stopped humming while making breakfast. He smiled less often. He stared silently through the dining room window after returning from work, barely touching his food. When she asked if everything was all right, he blamed stressful deadlines and promised things would improve soon. She believed him because trust had never been difficult between them. She had no reason to suspect that collection notices were hidden inside his office desk or that he spent every lunch break meeting creditors who demanded money he simply no longer had. One warm afternoon, Maren arrived home earlier than expected after a faculty workshop ended ahead of schedule. She found Declan sitting alone in the garage surrounded by unopened boxes filled with power tools and equipment. His eyes looked red as though he had been crying. The moment he heard the garage door open, he stood quickly and forced a smile that convinced no one. Maren wrapped her arms around him without asking questions. She simply held him until his breathing slowed. For one brief moment, Declan almost confessed everything. He almost admitted the company was collapsing. He almost admitted the debts. He almost admitted he had begun believing his family would lose everything. Instead, fear silenced him once again. As the weeks passed, Maren focused on preparing for motherhood. Her students surprised her with handmade cards covered in colorful drawings of babies, flowers, and smiling families. Parents brought tiny gifts to the classroom. Neighbors dropped off casseroles and knitted blankets. Every act of kindness reminded her how fortunate she was. She never imagined that, at the very same time, Declan had quietly met with an attorney, not to file bankruptcy together as a family, but to ask what would happen if he disappeared before creditors could pursue them both. The attorney strongly advised against it, explaining there were lawful ways to face financial hardship. Declan nodded politely, but shame had already convinced him that everyone would be better off without him. The morning he left looked ordinary. The sky was bright. Birds sang outside the kitchen window. Fresh coffee filled the house with its comforting aroma. Declan kissed Maren gently before she left for her prenatal appointment, lingering just a little longer than usual. He rested his hand on her stomach, feeling their baby kick one final time. His eyes filled with tears, he quickly looked away to hide. Maren smiled, assuming they were tears of happiness. She never imagined they were goodbye. When she returned home that afternoon and discovered the empty nursery, she searched every room in disbelief. His clothes were missing. His favorite watch was gone. The family photo albums had been left untouched, but every document connected to his business had disappeared. Panic replaced confusion as she called his phone again and again. Each attempt went directly to voicemail. She contacted friends, coworkers, neighbors. No one had seen him. The only certainty she had was the message glowing painfully on her phone. During the following days, grief settled into every corner of the house. Meals remained untouched on the kitchen table. The nursery door stayed closed because she couldn't bear to look inside. Every afternoon's sunlight that once made the rooms feel warm now only reminded her of the silence. She questioned every memory, every promise, every smile they had ever shared, wondering whether any of it had been real. Then reality became even harder. The mortgage payment was due. Medical bills continued arriving. Her maternity leave would begin in only a few weeks. Standing alone in the bank one sunny afternoon, Maren discovered that although Declan had not taken their personal savings, almost every account connected to his business had been frozen because of legal claims. Their financial future suddenly looked as uncertain as their marriage. For the first time since receiving his message, Maren allowed herself to cry in public. She sat on a bench outside the bank beneath a large oak tree while families walked past enjoying the beautiful weather. Nobody knew the quiet woman holding her pregnant belly had just watched her carefully planned future disappear. A gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes introduced herself as Evelyn, a retired teacher who had recognized Maren from a local school art exhibition months earlier. Without asking intrusive questions, Evelyn simply offered her a bottle of water and sat beside her in comfortable silence. Sometimes kindness doesn't begin with answers. Sometimes it begins with someone refusing to let another person sit alone. That simple meeting would become the beginning of a friendship neither of them expected, and before long, Evelyn would unknowingly place Maren on the path toward a truth far more heartbreaking, and far more hopeful, than she could possibly imagine. The following weeks unfolded beneath clear afternoon skies that seemed strangely indifferent to the pain Maren carried inside her. Every morning she reminded herself that her baby deserved a mother who kept moving forward, even when her own heart wanted to remain frozen in the moment everything had fallen apart. Evelyn quickly became a steady presence in her life, stopping by after lunch with homemade soup, fresh fruit, and stories from her 40 years as a teacher. She never pressured Maren to explain what had happened. Instead, she listened whenever Maren chose to speak and quietly reminded her that surviving heartbreak did not mean pretending it never existed. Maren's maternity leave began sooner than expected after her doctor noticed the emotional stress was beginning to affect her blood pressure. The doctor encouraged her to rest, avoid unnecessary worry, and focus entirely on preparing for the baby's arrival. Maren promised she would try, although she knew there was no simple way to silence the endless questions racing through her mind. Every afternoon she folded tiny baby clothes, arranged diapers inside neatly labeled baskets, and rocked gently in the old wooden chair beside the nursery window. The crib was still missing, leaving an empty space that hurt every time she looked at it. She considered buying another one but could never bring herself to do it. It wasn't the furniture she missed. It was the future it represented. Financially, life became far more difficult than she had imagined. The school district continued paying a portion of her salary during maternity leave, but it wasn't enough to cover every expense. She quietly sold decorative items she no longer needed, canceled subscriptions, and learned how to stretch every grocery trip. Neighbors occasionally left meals on her porch without signing their names. One family dropped off a stroller their granddaughter had outgrown. Another donated baby blankets that still looked brand new. Maren had always been the person helping others, and accepting help felt unfamiliar, yet she slowly realized that allowing people to care for her was not weakness. It was another form of courage. Several afternoons later, while sorting through paperwork she had avoided since Declan disappeared, Maren noticed a large envelope tucked inside the back of a filing cabinet. It contained business contracts, unpaid invoices, and handwritten calculations covering page after page. She expected to find evidence that Declan had secretly wasted money or lived irresponsibly. Instead, she found months of desperate attempts to save his company. Every page revealed another effort to reduce expenses, protect employees, and negotiate payment plans. There were letters asking clients for extensions, detailed budgets showing personal sacrifices, and lists of jobs he had taken himself to avoid laying off longtime workers. At the bottom of the envelope rested something that made her hands tremble. A small notebook. Inside, Declan had written private thoughts that were never meant for anyone else to read. The first entries were hopeful, filled with plans for the baby's nursery and excitement about becoming a father. Gradually the handwriting became more rushed, the sentences shorter, and the optimism disappeared. He wrote about feeling like he was drowning beneath responsibilities he could no longer control. He admitted that every time Maren smiled at him, the guilt became heavier because she believed everything was fine while he felt himself collapsing inside. One sentence nearly stopped her breathing. "If I lose everything, I can survive that. If Maren loses everything because of me, I will never forgive myself." Maren closed the notebook and cried quietly. For the first time, anger gave way to confusion. If he loved her this deeply, why hadn't he trusted her enough to tell the truth? The answer arrived unexpectedly only a week later. A middle-aged man named Lionel visited her home on a bright autumn afternoon. He introduced himself as Declan's former business partner. His expression carried the unmistakable weight of regret. After apologizing for arriving without notice, he explained that he had spent months trying to gather the courage to speak with her. Lionel confessed that Declan's company had not failed because of poor management or selfish decisions. The disaster had begun when a massive commercial project collapsed after the developer declared bankruptcy. Nearly a year's worth of completed work went unpaid. At the same time, rising material costs forced several other clients to cancel contracts. The business suddenly owed suppliers enormous sums while receiving almost no income. Declan had spent every available dollar paying his employees before paying himself. Eventually he sold equipment, emptied retirement accounts, and even borrowed against his own future simply to keep everyone else employed. Lionel lowered his head as shame filled his voice. He admitted that he had accepted a secure position with another firm the moment the company showed signs of trouble, leaving Declan to face the crisis almost entirely alone. Looking back, he realized his departure had broken more than their partnership. It had broken Declan's confidence. He kept saying the same thing, Lionel whispered. He believed he'd already failed you as a husband before your baby was even born. Those words echoed through Maren's heart for the rest of the afternoon. She wanted to stay angry. She wanted to believe Declan had simply stopped loving her. But the evidence surrounding her painted a different picture. He had made a terrible decision. Yet it had been born from fear rather than indifference. Days later, another unexpected envelope appeared in her mailbox. There was no return address. Inside rested a cashier's check for $12,000. Attached to it was a handwritten note. For the mortgage. She should never lose her home because of me. There was no signature. Maren stared at the familiar handwriting until tears blurred every word. It was unmistakably Declan's. He was alive. He knew where she lived. He was helping from a distance. But he still wasn't coming home. The questions became almost unbearable. Where was he? Why hide if he truly wanted to help? Why watch from afar instead of standing beside his wife when she needed him most? Life changed forever 2 weeks later when Maren went into labor on a warm afternoon while watering flowers outside her front porch. Evelyn happened to arrive at exactly the right moment and drove her calmly to the hospital. After several exhausting hours, Maren gave birth to a healthy baby girl with soft brown hair and bright curious eyes. She named her Clara, the name she and Declan had chosen together months earlier. The first time Maren held her daughter, every fear that had consumed her for months seemed to fade into the background. Clara wrapped tiny fingers around her mother's hand with surprising strength, and Maren realized she no longer had the luxury of living only for herself. Every decision from that moment forward would shape the little life resting peacefully against her chest. As joyful as the day was, one empty chair inside the hospital room reminded her of the person who should have been there. She wondered if somewhere, under the same afternoon sunlight, Declan was thinking about the daughter he had never met. 3 months passed. Clara grew stronger every day, filling the once silent house with laughter instead of sorrow. Maren slowly returned to teaching part-time while Evelyn happily watched Clara during the afternoons. Life was still difficult, but it no longer felt hopeless. Then everything changed again. One sunny afternoon, Lionel called unexpectedly. His voice sounded urgent. He had discovered something he believed Maren deserved to know. After months of searching, he had finally located Declan's whereabouts through an old insurance claim. What Lionel learned would finally reveal why Declan had remained hidden all this time, and force Maren to make the most important decision of her life. Lionel arrived at Maren's house the very next afternoon carrying a worn leather folder that looked as though it had traveled through countless offices before finally reaching her hands. He sat quietly at the kitchen table while Clara slept peacefully in her bassinet near the window, warm sunlight filling the room. For several moments he struggled to find the right words, and Maren realized whatever he had discovered had weighed heavily on him. According to the insurance records, Declan had never left the country or started a new family as many people had quietly assumed. Only 3 days after leaving home, he had been involved in a serious highway accident while driving to another state in search of temporary construction work. A truck had crossed into his lane, leaving him with multiple broken bones, internal injuries, and months of rehabilitation. He survived, but his recovery was painfully slow. During that time, he refused to let anyone notify Maren. Lionel could hardly believe it when he first learned the truth. He visited Declan several times and pleaded with him to return home, but every conversation ended the same way. Declan insisted that after abandoning his pregnant wife, he no longer deserved a place in her life. He believed she would eventually heal without him and that reappearing would only reopen wounds he had already caused. Maren closed her eyes as tears rolled silently down her face. She was devastated that he had suffered alone, but another part of her could not ignore the anger still living inside her heart. Every doctor's appointment, every frightening moment during pregnancy, every lonely afternoon preparing for Clara's arrival, every tear she had cried believing she had been abandoned forever, those memories remained painfully real. The accident explained why he had disappeared from the world, but it did not erase the choice he had made before it happened. Lionel handed her another envelope. Inside was a letter dated only 2 weeks earlier. The paper was creased from being folded and unfolded many times. Declan wrote that he had started writing dozens of letters during rehabilitation but destroyed most of them because none seemed worthy of forgiveness. He admitted that every afternoon he imagined Clara taking her first breath, opening her eyes, smiling for the first time, and learning to crawl, while he remained a stranger because of his own fear. He confessed that shame had become a prison stronger than any hospital walls. He knew running away had been the greatest mistake of his life, yet every passing day made returning feel even more impossible. The anonymous checks had come from money he earned designing building plans remotely during rehabilitation. He wanted Clara to have a safe home, even if she grew up believing her father had never cared. The final paragraph was stained with what looked like dried tears. If Maren has found peace, please don't tell her where I am. She deserves happiness more than she deserves another apology from me. But if, by some miracle, she ever wants answers, I will spend the rest of my life giving them." Maren folded the letter carefully. For several days she said nothing to anyone. She spent long afternoons walking Clara through the neighborhood park, watching children laugh beneath bright blue skies while she searched her own heart. She asked herself difficult questions. Was forgiveness the same as forgetting? Could someone deeply love another person and still make a devastating decision? Would meeting Declan help her heal, or would it simply reopen every wound she had worked so hard to close? Evelyn never answered those questions for her. Instead, she reminded Maren that forgiveness was not something owed to another person. It was a gift offered only when the injured heart was truly ready. A week later, Maren made her decision. She asked Lionel to arrange a meeting. Not because everything was suddenly forgiven. Not because she wanted to pretend the past never happened. But because Clara deserved the chance to know the truth about her father, and Maren deserved the chance to hear the truth with her own ears. They met on a bright Saturday afternoon in a botanical garden filled with blooming flowers and quiet walking paths. Families pushed strollers beneath flowering trees while children chased butterflies across the grass. It was peaceful, almost painfully ordinary. Declan was already there. He stood slowly as Maren approached, leaning slightly on a cane. His face looked older than she remembered, marked by scars that had not been there before. The confident man who had once built nursery furniture with excited hands now looked humbled by grief and regret. Neither of them spoke at first. There were no dramatic embraces. No perfect movie moment. Only silence. Then Declan's eyes fell upon Clara. His entire body trembled. He had imagined this moment hundreds of times, but nothing prepared him for seeing his daughter smiling peacefully in her stroller. Tears streamed freely down his face as he knelt with difficulty, stopping several feet away as though afraid he had not earned the right to come closer. Maren gently lifted Clara into her arms and, after a long pause, stepped forward. Without saying a word, she placed their daughter into Declan's waiting arms. He held Clara as though she were the most precious treasure in the world. She reached up with tiny fingers and wrapped them around one of his. At that instant, the little girl who knew nothing about betrayal, fear, or regret offered something the adults had struggled to find for months: simple, unconditional innocence. Declan cried harder than he ever had in his life. He apologized without making excuses. He admitted every mistake. He accepted full responsibility for abandoning the woman who needed him most. He never blamed the business. He never blamed the accident. He blamed only the fear that convinced him running away was easier than admitting he had failed. Maren listened quietly. When he finished, she finally spoke. She told him there had been mornings when she hated him, afternoons when she desperately missed him, and countless moments when she questioned her own worth because the man she loved had disappeared. She explained that trust had been shattered, and rebuilding it would take time, patience, and consistent actions rather than beautiful words. Declan agreed immediately. He expected nothing more. Over the following months, he proved his sincerity through ordinary faithfulness. He attended every pediatric appointment. He helped feed Clara, changed diapers, read children's books aloud, and learned how to comfort her when she cried. He found steady work with a local architectural firm, refusing positions that required constant travel because he wanted to be present every day. He also began volunteering with a nonprofit organization that helped struggling business owners find financial counseling before desperation led them to make irreversible decisions. Sharing his own failures became painful, yet he hoped someone else might choose honesty before fear destroyed another family. Maren watched carefully. She did not rush. Forgiveness grew slowly, like a tree putting down deep roots after surviving a violent storm. Months became years. Little by little, trust returned. Not because the past disappeared, but because every new day Declan chose responsibility over avoidance, truth over silence, and love over fear. One sunny afternoon several years later, Clara started kindergarten at the same elementary school where Maren taught art. As they watched her run happily toward her classroom carrying an oversized backpack, Declan quietly reached for Maren's hand. This time she did not pull away. She smiled. Not because life had been perfect, but because together they had learned that broken things could be repaired when people found the courage to face the truth. That evening, while sorting through an old storage box, Maren found the first heartbreaking message Declan had sent the day he left. She read it one final time. Then she folded it carefully beside the letters of apology he had written during rehabilitation. She kept them all. Not as reminders of pain, but as reminders of how fear can destroy even the strongest love when honesty is replaced by silence. Years later, when Clara was old enough to ask difficult questions, her parents told her the complete truth. They never hid their mistakes. They explained that courage is not pretending everything is fine. Courage is asking for help before pride and fear convince you to walk away from the people who love you most. Clara grew up understanding that forgiveness never excuses wrongdoing, but it can open the door to healing when genuine repentance is followed by lasting change. Before this story ends, we'd love to hear from you. If you were in Maren's place, do you think you could forgive someone who left during the hardest season of your life if they truly changed? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective may encourage someone facing a similar struggle today. Life did not give Maren and Declan a perfect ending. It gave them something far more valuable. A truthful one. A family rebuilt one honest day at a time. A daughter raised in a home where difficult conversations were no longer avoided. And a future that proved even the deepest wounds can become the beginning of wisdom, compassion, and hope when people choose courage over fear. If this story touched your heart, thank you for staying until the end and for being part of our community. Your kindness, thoughtful comments, and support mean more than you know, and we hope this journey reminds you that even after life's darkest moments, healing is still possible when truth, grace, and perseverance walk hand in hand.